doing SDG 13, which is climate action in specifically in Japan. So I'm going to start out with the global warming problem and global CO2 emissions from fossil fuels. So currently, carbon dioxide emissions and other greenhouse gases are the primary drivers to climate change. There has been a 2-degree Fahrenheit increase since the 1880s, which is shown in the bottom graph. The extra heat increasing has increased seasonal temperatures, decreases snow and ice coverage, and changes habitats for plants and animals. If yearly emissions continue to rise rapidly, since they have since 2000, models project that by the end of the century, global temperatures will be at least 5 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than from 1901 to 1960's average, possibly as much as 10.2 degrees warmer if annual emissions increase more slowly and begin to decline significantly. By 2050, models project temperatures could still be at least 2.4 degrees warmer than the first half of the 20th century, possibly up to 5.9 degrees warmer. Since the estimates of emissions for fossil fuels and industries are much more certain than the land use change, this is talking about the bottom graph, we still adopt the former as our main CO2 emissions metric. However, we now also chart on land use change and combinations emissions from fossil fuels, industry, and land use change. So this is the cumulative CO2 emissions. This is a map of it. So the U.S. is above 250 billion tons over all time, and some runner-ups are China, Russia, some other big countries like that. The global energy related to CO2 emissions rose by 65%, which totals to 36.3 billion tons. The increase in the global CO2 emissions was the largest in the world this past year, and the recovery of energy demanded in 2021 was combined by adverse weather and energy market conditions. Global energy-related carbon dioxide emissions rose by 6% in 2021 to total the 36.3 billion tons, their highest level ever, as the world economy rebounded strongly from the COVID-19 crisis and relied heavily on coal to power that growth. The recovery of energy demanded in 2021 was combined by adverse weather and energy market conditions, notably the spikes in natural gas prices, which led to more coal being burned despite renewable power generation registering its largest growth ever. Japan's CO2 emissions. So Japan's greenhouse gas emissions dropped to 5.1% to a record low in 2020. This will mark Japan's 7th straight annual emissions drop. Japan's emissions fell to 1.149 billion tons compared to the 1.211 billion tons the previous years. By 2030, there is a target energy mix for Japan. Renewable energy, they would like to target 36 to 38% of the total energy, nuclear 20 to 22%, and fossil fuels bring it down to 41%. Japan's emissions in 2020 fell to 1.149 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide, equivalent from the 1.21 billion tons the previous year, to hit their lowest since the 1990 financial year, when it began compiling data on greenhouse gases. Primarily energy ministry data was shown. United States CO2 emissions. This is the total CO2 emissions per year since 1800 to now 2001. In 2021, the total U.S. energy-related CO2 emissions increased by 7% from the pre-pandemic levels to total about 5.01 billion tons. The conditions of the rise energy related CO2 emissions in the United States were from the academic effects of the pandemic. By 2030, the government would like to achieve a 50 to 52% reduction in economy-wide net greenhouse gas pollution. Both short and long-term factors contribute to the rise of energy-related CO2 emissions. Increase in the consumption of petroleum products, primarily in the transportation area, accounted for over half of the rise in the U.S. CO2 emissions. CO2 emissions from the U.S. Motor gasoline increased by 9% and jet fuel increased by 27% as travel demand began to return to pre-pandemic levels. The government announced a new target for the U.S. to achieve a 50 to 52% reduction from the 2005 levels in economy-wide net greenhouse pollution in 2030, building on the progress to date by positioning American workers and industry to attack the climate crisis. So this is my Xmind tool. So I focused on the Internet of Things to combat climate change because I feel like it's the most widely used global information technology, and it can be used in many areas. So one thing I focused on was the Internet of Things and smart devices, specifically smart efficient appliances, smart efficient lighting, smart efficient heating and cooling systems inside the home. Computer systems like Internet of Things are used to keep track of the efficiency and the amount of electricity that renewable energy sources are generating compared to non-energy renewable sources. Smart agriculture is another thing that the Internet of Things is using to combat climate change. One big thing is the sensors to track the use of materials. Four main ones are soil management sensors. One of the four main ones is soil management sensors. Soil sensors measure soil organic matter, the level of soil erosion, and its fertility. Agriculture production is very sensitive to the climate variations, according to more than 1% of all of the crop yield variation in the last century. Adoption to the climate change requires a new strategy to increase yields and diversify livelihoods. If the impacts of the climate change are too severe, farmers must implement system changes and resource allocation. So that is part of the early warning systems to help with early warning to natural disasters. Part of the pet management sensors is that it's very important for soil health to prevent pests and excessive moisture for soiling the crops. Addressing the climate change issues becomes possible to reduce a number of pests and improving overall soil health. Moisture soil level detectors. Soil moisture sensors in return can also be used in conjunction with the rain check locations to monitor the conditions of the soil moisture in low vegetation areas. So decrease in reliability on non-renewable energy sources. One thing I decided to focus on was grid management. Energy companies can leverage Internet of Things alongside smart grid technology to efficiently manage the distribution of energy to where it is needed most. So on cooler days where solar is less effective, stored energy could be sent to buildings and households, or wind turbines can be used as a source as well. Internet of Things has given energy companies the ability to track and monitor changes in the energy demands. Another thing I decided to focus on was residential energy management, which also ties in the Internet of Things smart devices. Smart meter technology can be used to measure consumption in real time, helping decrease energy usage for large appliances like air conditioning units. Smart thermostats fitted with sensors can take a room temperature to easily maintain ideal heating and cooling without having it to be on all day, constantly working, constantly using that energy that is constantly burning fossil fuels. So all these things can help combat climate change overall. So thank you, that's all.